The parrot was the only witness, and its words changed the verdict. Judge William Harrison adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses while observing the most unusual scene of his 45-year career. There he was, at 78 years old, about to retire, facing a situation he never imagined seeing in his courtroom. It was then that the green parrot perched on the makeshift stand next to the microphone opened its beak and said with absolute clarity, "She took Mommy's money." The silence that followed in the packed courtroom of Pine Creek, in rural Vermont, was so profound that only the sound of the slowly spinning ceiling fans could be heard. Ellen Peterson, 52 years old, a woman of simple appearance with graying hair tied in a bun, looked at her 3 years older sister with a mixture of sadness and hope in her eyes. Across the defendant's table, Laura Peterson nervously adjusted her navy blue blazer and whispered something to the lawyer beside her. "Your Honor," said Dr. Richard Thompson, Laura's lawyer, rising with all the pomp that his 30 years of legal practice had bestowed upon him, "with all due respect to the court, a parrot cannot be considered a valid witness in a legal proceeding." Judge William sighed deeply. 45 years presiding over hearings, and he had never encountered such a peculiar situation. The case in question was an inheritance dispute between the two Peterson sisters, daughters of Mrs. Margaret Peterson, 85 years old, who had been diagnosed with senile dementia 2 years earlier. The central issue revolved around the disappearance of $200,000 from the elderly woman's savings account. "Dr. Thompson," replied the magistrate with the measured voice that characterized him, "I am aware that the situation is unusual. However, according to the article presented by Ms. Frances Miller, the defender of the petitioner Ellen Peterson, this animal was the only constant presence during the last months when the amounts disappeared from Mrs. Margaret's account." Ms. Frances Miller, Ellen's lawyer, a woman in her early 40s with brown hair cut in an elegant bob, adjusted the papers in front of her. She knew she was dealing with an unprecedented case, but there was something in her client's hopelessness that motivated her to try every legal possibility. The parrot, affectionately named Polly by the Peterson family 23 years ago, moved its head from side to side, as if assessing the situation. Its green feathers shone under the artificial light of the courtroom, and its small, attentive eyes seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. "Polly has always been very clever," said Ellen with a choked voice. "Mommy used to say he understood everything that happened at home. When Daddy was alive, the little creature would repeat the conversations he heard." Laura rolled her eyes discreetly. A retired public school math teacher, she had always considered herself the more rational and responsible daughter. She had taken care of raising her twin daughters, now 25 years old, while Ellen had remained single, caring for their mother and working as a house cleaner to supplement the family income. "Your Honor," said Laura, standing up without permission, "this is absurd. My sister is trying to use an animal to slander me and—" "She took the money!" shouted Polly again, flapping its wings and startling everyone. The murmuring in the courtroom, already full of curious onlookers from the small town, increased considerably. Pine Creek had only 15,000 inhabitants, and a case like this had been the talk of the week in all the businesses, at the farmers' market, and even during the masses at the main church. "Order," banged the gavel Judge William. "Mrs. Laura, please return to your seat. Ms. Miller, you may proceed with your argument." Ellen Peterson's lawyer took a deep breath before continuing. "Your Honor, we know that parrots are capable of memorizing and reproducing not just words, but entire conversation contexts. Polly lived in the Peterson family home for over 2 decades. He was present when my client discovered the money had disappeared from her mother's account. He was also present during the discussions about the matter." "Objection," interrupted Dr. Richard Thompson. "There's no legal precedent for this. Besides, how can we be sure Ellen herself didn't train the animal to say these words?" Polly tilted his head toward the lawyer and made a sound that resembled laughter. Then, with perfect clarity, he said, "Dr. Richard's nervous. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing." The room erupted in suppressed laughter and murmurs. Judge William Harrison himself struggled to maintain his composure. In all his years on the bench, he had never witnessed anything remotely like this. "How did he know my name?" murmured Dr. Richard to Laura, visibly disturbed. "Your Honor," continued Ms. Frances Miller, seizing the moment, "I request that an animal behavior specialist be appointed to evaluate Polly's statements. Dr. Charles Edward Ferguson, veterinarian and animal psychology specialist from the University of Vermont, is available to provide this service to the court." Judge William shuffled some papers on his desk. At 78 years old, nearing retirement, he had seen just about everything. Family cases were always the most delicate in his opinion, especially when they involved elderly people and inheritance matters. But this case was testing all his legal knowledge and, more importantly, his patience. "Is Dr. Charles Edward with us today?" asked the magistrate. "Yes, Your Honor," replied Ms. Frances Miller. "He's in the adjacent room, awaiting your authorization to proceed with the evaluation." "Very well. I declare a 2-hour recess for the specialist to evaluate the animal and prepare his report. The hearing will resume at 2 o'clock. As the courtroom emptied, Ellen remained seated, watching Polly, who had been transferred to a special cage brought by the veterinarian. Silent tears streamed down her face, marked by years of hard work and constant care for her mother. Laura, meanwhile, went to the hallway where she met her husband, John Carter, a 58-year-old man who worked as a manager at a local bank branch. "Laura, this is getting out of control," said John Carter in a low voice. "Maybe you should talk to your sister and try to resolve this outside of court." "Resolve what, John Carter?" replied Laura, agitated. "I didn't take any money. That Parrot must be repeating something he heard on television or who knows where." "But Laura—" "No buts," she interrupted. "Are you doubting me, too?" John Carter lowered his eyes. Married for 30 years, he knew Laura's personality well. She had always been a determined and controlling woman, traits that helped her successfully raise their twin daughters after he lost his job during the 2015 economic crisis. But lately, he had noticed something different about his wife. Small lies, elaborate justifications for expenses she couldn't properly explain. Across the hallway, Ellen was whispering with her daughter, Melissa, 28 years old, who had taken the day off from her job at the pharmacy to accompany her mother. "Mom, are you sure that Parrot can really help?" asked Melissa, worried. "Daughter, Polly was there when it all happened. She saw when your aunt entered Grandma's room that afternoon. I had gone out to buy her medicine, and when I returned, Laura was all nervous, saying that Mom had gotten confused about the money." Melissa gently held her mother's hand. She knew that Ellen had dedicated her entire adult life to caring for her grandmother, especially after the dementia diagnosis was confirmed. Meanwhile, Laura visited her mother only once a month, always in a hurry, always claiming she had too many tasks. "How is Grandma Margaret today?" asked Melissa. "She had a good morning. She even recognized me and asked about Polly. The doctor said separating the two could speed up her mental confusion." In the adjoining room, Dr. Charles Edward Ferguson, a robust 50-year-old man with a well-groomed grey beard, was attentively observing Polly's behavior. As an animal psychology specialist, he had dealt with curious cases throughout his career, but he had never been called to act as an expert in a courtroom. "Hello, Polly," he said softly, approaching the cage. The parrot watched him for a few seconds before responding. "Hello, Doctor. Ellen is sad." Dr. Charles Edward noted the interaction in his notebook. The animal's ability to contextualize was impressive. Parrots of Polly's species, scientifically known as Amazona aestiva, were recognized for their exceptional intelligence and long-term memory capacity. "Polly, can you tell me about the money?" asked the veterinarian, deciding to directly test the central issue of the case. The parrot remained silent for almost a minute, moving her head from side to side, as if processing the question. Then, with a clarity that even surprised the specialist, she began to speak. Laura entered the room. Mom was sleeping. She opened the drawer, took the papers, spoke on the phone. "I've got everything, you can transfer the money." Mom woke up and asked, "What are you doing, daughter?" Laura said, "Nothing, Mom, go back to sleep." Dr. Charles Edward stopped writing for a moment, impressed by the level of detail in the narrative. He had studied cases of parrots reproducing entire conversations, but they were usually disconnected fragments. Polly's account had a beginning, middle, and end, like a structured memory. "Polly, when did this happen?" asked the veterinarian. "When Ellen went to the pharmacy." The sun was high. Mum took the little blue pill. Dr. Charles Edward knew that Mrs. Margaret took a blue anxiety pill always after lunch. If the parrot's narrative was correct, the incident had happened during the afternoon, when Ellen had gone out to buy medications. Meanwhile, in the courthouse hallway, a tense conversation was unfolding between the Peterson sisters. "Laura, please tell me the truth," pleaded Ellen, approaching her sister. "Did you take Mum's money?" "How can you ask me something like that?" replied Laura, indignant. "I'm your sister. That's exactly why I need to know. That money was all Mom had for her treatments. You know that my disability pension barely covers basic expenses." Laura averted her gaze. Ellen was 43 when she suffered a work accident that affected her spine, forcing her to retire early with a reduced benefit. Since then, she had relied on the funds saved by her mother to pay for the special care necessary for treating the dementia. "Ellen, I didn't take any money," said Laura, but her voice lacked the conviction from before. "If the money disappeared, there has to be another explanation." "What explanation?" "The account only had 2 authorized people, me and you. The bank confirmed that the withdrawal was made with a valid power of attorney. A power of attorney that only you had access to." John Carter observed the conversation of his sisters-in-law from a few meters away. He knew that Laura had made some investments in recent months. When he asked about the source of the money, she had said it was an inheritance from a distant aunt. But now, seeing the situation, a cruel doubt began to form in his mind. Laura's twin daughters, Jessica and Jennifer, arrived at the courthouse during the recess. Both college students, they had managed to get excused from classes to support their mother. But upon sensing the tension in the air and the curious glances from those present, they began to understand the gravity of the situation. "Mom, what's going on here?" asked Jessica, the older twin by 15 minutes. "Nothing but an injustice, my dear," replied Laura, hugging them both. "Your aunt is trying to blame me for Grandma Margaret's missing money." Jennifer looked at Aunt Ellen, who had always been affectionate with them during their childhood. It was Ellen who took them fishing at the river on weekends, who made the best birthday cakes, and who always had the patience to help with homework when their mother was busy with work. "Aunt Ellen," said Jennifer, approaching, "do you really believe that Mommy took Grandma's money?" Ellen looked at her niece with tenderness, but also with deep sadness in her eyes. "Jennifer, I didn't want to believe it, but the money is gone. And Polly, well, you'll understand when you hear what he has to say." Dr. Charles Edward Ferguson returned to the courtroom exactly at 2 o'clock, carrying a detailed report and a small digital recording. The murmur in the hall grew louder as he approached the central table. "Your Honor," said the veterinarian, "after 2 hours of observation and interaction with the animal, I can state that Polly demonstrates exceptional cognitive abilities for his species. He not only reproduces memorized words, but shows the capacity for contextualization and temporal sequencing of events." Judge William adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. "Dr. Charles Edward, in your professional opinion, can the animal's statements be considered reliable?" "Your Honor, although we cannot attribute a conscious intention to testify to an animal, parrots of the species Amazona estiva possess exceptional memory and contextual association abilities. They do not invent information, they only reproduce what has been observed and memorized." Dr. Richard stood up immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. The expert is attributing human characteristics to an animal. There is no solid scientific basis to consider a parrot as a source of judicial evidence." "Dr. Richard," replied Dr. Charles Edward calmly, "there are international precedents. In 2016, in France, a similar case was accepted in court. In 2019, in the United States, a parrot's statements were considered valid circumstantial evidence. The issue is not whether the animal understands the concept of truth, but whether its memorizations correspond to real events." Polly, who had remained relatively quiet during the technical discussions, suddenly began to speak. Laura's nervous. She always gets nervous when she does something wrong. When she broke Mom's vase, she was like this too. Laura visibly paled. The vase Polly referred to had been broken over 15 years ago, when she was still a teenager. At the time, she had blamed the neighbor's cat, and only Polly had witnessed the actual accident. "How can he remember something that happened so many years ago?" Jessica whispered to her sister. "Parrots can live for over 50 years, explained Dr. Charles Edward, who had overheard the comment. "Their long-term memory is comparable to that of a human being. They form lasting emotional bonds and can associate people with specific events in their lives." Judge William tapped the gavel softly. "Dr. Charles Edward, please play the most relevant statements the animal made during its evaluation." The veterinarian turned on his digital recorder. Polly's voice echoed clearly through the courtroom. Laura came into the room. Mommy was sleeping. She opened the drawer, took the papers, spoke on the phone. "I've got everything. You can transfer the money." Mommy woke up and asked, "What are you doing, dear?" Laura said, "Nothing, Mommy. Go back to sleep." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Laura held her twin daughter's hands, who looked at her with a mix of confusion and growing concern. "There's more," said Dr. Charles Edward, preparing to play another recording. Polly also mentioned a specific phone conversation. The second recording began to play. Laura spoke on the phone. "I got the power of attorney. My mother won't even notice. With her dementia, I can say she authorized anything." The person on the other end said, "Are you sure there won't be any trouble?" Laura answered, "My sister is very naive. She doesn't even know how banks work." Ellen brought her hands to her face, beginning to cry silently. Melissa put her arm around her mother, also emotional. John Carter looked at Laura with an expression she had never seen before. It wasn't anger nor disappointment. It was something worse. It was the complete disillusionment of someone who had just discovered they didn't truly know the person with whom they had shared the last 30 years of their life. "Laura," John Carter said quietly, "tell me this isn't true." Laura opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came out. Her daughters watched her with increasingly questioning looks. "Mom," said Jennifer, her voice trembling, "did you really do that?" Dr. Richard, realizing his case was rapidly falling apart, tried one last strategy. "Your Honor, even if we accept the animal's statements, they don't constitute material evidence of the crime. They could be distorted interpretations of legitimate conversations about the elderly woman's care." Miss Frances Miller stood up with renewed confidence. "Your Honor, I request that the bank be required to provide the detailed transaction history of Mrs. Margaret Peterson's account over the last 6 months, including data on who made the transactions and when." Judge William nodded. "Request granted. Dr. Richard, does your client have any objection to this investigation?" Dr. Richard looked at Laura, who remained pale and silent. He knew that if the bank records confirmed the Parrot's allegations, the case would be lost. "Your Honor, my client reserves the right to—" "I took the money," Laura said suddenly, interrupting the lawyer. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The twin daughters exchanged shocked glances. John Carter closed his eyes as if trying to make it all disappear. Ellen stopped crying and looked at her sister with a mixture of relief and sadness. "Laura," whispered Dr. Richard, desperate, "don't say anything more." But Laura continued, as if an emotional dam had broken. "I took the $200,000 from Mommy's account. I used the power of attorney she signed when she was still lucid, but I didn't use the money for myself." Her voice began to break. "Jessica and Jennifer needed the money to finish college. The student loan was denied and I had no way to pay." Jessica and Jennifer looked at each other, horrified. "Mom, you didn't have to do that," said Jessica, with tears in her eyes. "We could have found another way." "What other way?" shouted Laura, losing her composure completely. "Do you think it's easy being a mother? Do you think it's easy watching your own daughters miss opportunities because of a lack of money?" Ellen slowly rose and walked to where her sister was sitting. "Laura, you could have talked to me. We could have found a solution together." "Talk to you?" replied Laura with bitterness. "You who never left home, who never married, who never had children? What would you understand about the responsibilities I have?" The words hit Ellen like a punch in the stomach. For years she had given up her own life to care for their parents, and later their mother. She had turned down marriage proposals, had set aside personal dreams, all to ensure that Mrs. Margaret had the necessary care in her old age. "I understand more than you think," said Ellen, with a calm that surprised everyone. "I understand what it means to sacrifice your own life for others. What I don't understand is how you could take the money from our sick mother and still accuse me of incompetence." Polly, who had remained quiet during Laura's confession, suddenly began to speak. "Mommy always said, 'My daughters need to stick together. When I'm no longer here, they'll only have each other.'" The phrase echoed in the silent courtroom. Mrs. Margaret used to repeat these words whenever the daughters fought during their childhood and teenage years. John Carter approached Laura. "Laura, does the money still exist? Can you still return it?" Laura nodded, crying. "Most of it is in a savings account I opened for the girls. I only used $20,000 to pay off some credit card debts." Judge William, who had followed the entire confession in silence, finally spoke. "Mrs. Laura, do you admit to having improperly used funds belonging to your mother, Mrs. Margaret Peterson?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Mrs. Ellen, considering the defendant's confession and her willingness to repay the funds, what would be your expectation regarding the outcome of this case?" Ellen looked at her sister, who was emotionally shattered. She looked at her nieces, who seemed to have aged years in just a few hours. She looked at John Carter, who was facing the realization that his wife had committed a crime. "Your Honor, I just want my mother's money back, and I want my sister to seek help. She wasn't well when she did this." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Dr. Richard tried to intervene. "Your Honor, considering the mitigating circumstances and the defendant's willingness to compensate for the damages—" "Dr. Richard," interrupted the judge, "despite the circumstances, there was qualified embezzlement. However, considering the spontaneous confession, the willingness to repay the funds and the family relationship involved, I will apply an alternative sentence." The magistrate paused, organizing his thoughts. "Mrs. Laura Peterson, you are sentenced to 2 years of community service at elderly care institutions. Additionally, you must fully repay the embezzled funds within 60 days and undergo psychological counseling for a period of 1 year." Laura nodded, accepting the sentence without contesting. "There is one additional condition," continued Judge William. "As part of the community service, you must dedicate 4 hours weekly to the direct care of your own mother, under your sister's supervision." Ellen looked at the magistrate in surprise. She hadn't specifically requested this, but she understood the wisdom of the decision. "Your Honor," said Laura with a choked voice, "I accept all the conditions." Judge William banged the gavel one last time. "Case closed. Mrs. Ellen, you may take Polly. And if I may offer a personal observation on my last days on the bench, this Parrot has shown more honesty than many human witnesses who have passed through this court." Polly tilted his head toward the judge and said, "Thank you, Doctor." The truth always comes out. In the days that followed, the small town of Pine Creek could talk of nothing else. The story of the Parrot that testified in court spread quickly, even reaching the state capitol through reports in local newspapers. Laura began serving her alternative sentence by working at the St. Teresa nursing home located in the town center. Initially, she felt deeply humiliated by the situation. A former respected teacher in the community, she was now there feeding and caring for people who didn't always recognize her due to their mental conditions. It was during the 3rd week of community service that Laura met Mr. Anthony, a 92-year-old man who had been abandoned by his family in a situation very similar to Mrs. Margaret's. "You're new here," commented Mr. Anthony during dinner. "Yes, I'm here fulfilling a legal obligation," Laura answered honestly. "Ah, I see. Did you do something wrong?" Laura hesitated for a moment. "I did something wrong to my own mother. I took money from her without asking." Mr. Anthony nodded slowly. "My children did the same to me, They sold my house, took all my retirement money, and brought me here saying it was temporary. That was 3 years ago. The conversation with Mr. Anthony opened Laura's eyes to a reality she had never truly considered. There were dozens of elderly people there who had been abandoned or mistreated by their own families. People who, like her mother, depended on the honesty and love of those who were supposed to protect them. Meanwhile, at home, a new family dynamic was establishing itself. Ellen had moved back into her childhood home to take full-time care of Mrs. Margaret. The 4 weekly hours that Laura was required to spend there were initially tense and uncomfortable. Mrs. Margaret, in her moments of clarity, didn't seem to fully understand what had happened between her daughters. But Polly, always attentive, showed his preference clearly. He sang happily when Ellen was around and remained quiet during Laura's visits. "He's still mad at me," Laura commented during one of her mandatory visits. "Polly doesn't get mad," Ellen replied, preparing their mother's lunch. "He just doesn't trust you anymore." "And you, Ellen? Do you trust me?" Ellen stopped what she was doing and looked directly at her sister. "Laura, I want to trust you, but trust is something that gets rebuilt slowly." During this period, John Carter was facing his own inner demons. The woman he thought he knew had committed a crime against her own sick mother. He constantly questioned himself if there were other secrets that Laura was hiding from him. The twin daughters, in turn, decided to temporarily pause college and work to pay for their studies honestly. The revelation that their education had been funded with money stolen from their grandmother left them deeply ashamed. "Mum, we don't want that money," said Jessica during one of the mandatory weekly visits to their grandmother's house. "But girls, you need to study." "We need to study with our own dignity," Jennifer interrupted. "We'll work and save the money honestly." It was during the 2nd month of her sentence that something unexpected began to happen. Laura, working daily with the elderly at St. Teresa Retirement Home, began to truly understand the vulnerability and fragility of her own mother. Mrs. Alice, 87 years old, had developed a special affection for Laura. The elderly woman, who suffered from advanced dementia, often mistook Laura for her own daughter, who had passed away years before. "My daughter, you came to visit me," Mrs. Alice would say whenever she saw Laura. Initially, Laura corrected the confusion, but over time, she realized that simply accepting the elderly woman's affection brought more comfort to both of them. "Yes, Mother, I came," Laura would reply, holding Mrs. Alice's wrinkled hands. "You won't abandon me, will you, dear?" "No, Mother, I won't abandon you." These daily conversations with Mrs. Alice made Laura reflect deeply on her relationship with her own mother. She realized that in recent years, her visits to Mrs. Margaret had been purely routine. She would arrive, ask if everything was all right, chat about trivialities for a few minutes, and then leave. She had never sat down to really talk with her mother about her fears, her memories, her desires. She had never asked if she felt lonely or if there was something specific that would make her happier. It was during one of these reflections that Laura decided to do something different on her next obligatory visit to the family home. Instead of arriving and leaving quickly, she brought an old photo album she had kept at her house, an album that contained pictures of the Peterson family since the 1960s, when her parents were young. "Mum, I brought some photos for us to look at together," said Laura, sitting next to Mrs. Margaret in the armchair where she spent most of her time. Mrs. Margaret, who was having one of her more confused days, looked at Laura without fully recognizing her. You're Laura?" "Yes, Mom. Your eldest daughter." "Ah, Laura." Mrs. Margaret's face lit up slightly. "You were such a studious girl." Laura opened the album to the first page, where there was a photo from 1975 showing the Peterson family during a Christmas celebration. "Look here, Mum, Christmas 1975. Do you remember? You made a huge turkey and Dad complained it wouldn't fit in the refrigerator." Mrs. Margaret took the photo with trembling hands, bringing it closer to her eyes. "Your father, where is your father?" "Dad passed away 5 years ago, Mom, remember?" For a moment, confusion returned to Mrs. Margaret's face, but then she smiled. "He was a good man. Worked so hard at the workshop, always with his hands dirty with grease, but always with a clean heart." Laura felt a pang in her chest. It had been a long time since she had heard her mother speak so clearly about the past. Mom, do you miss him? I miss him a lot, especially at night. He always gave me a little kiss before bed and said, Margaret, you're the most beautiful woman in Pine Creek. Polly, who was in her nearby cage, suddenly repeated, Margaret, you're the most beautiful woman in Pine Creek. Both Laura and Mrs. Margaret turned to look at the parrot. He still remembers Dad's voice, murmured Laura, moved. Polly has always been special, said Mrs. Margaret, reaching her hand toward the cage. Your father said he understood everything that happened in our house. Laura opened the cage and let Polly perch on her arm. The parrot watched her for a few seconds, as if assessing her intentions. Polly, can you forgive me? Asked Laura, feeling a bit silly for talking seriously to an animal. To her surprise, Polly replied, Everyone makes mistakes sometimes. The important thing is to fix them. Laura was impressed. She hadn't been the one to teach those words to the parrot. It had probably been Ellen, or perhaps even Mrs. Margaret herself, in a moment of clarity. At that moment, Ellen returned from the pharmacy and found the scene. Her mother, her sister and Polly all together, looking at old photos. Ellen, look, said Mrs. Margaret, waving to her younger daughter. Laura brought the old photos. Do you remember this one? It was your 10th birthday. Ellen approached, cautious. It was rare to see her sister interacting so patiently with their mother. I do remember, Mom. You made that chocolate cake I loved. And Laura helped with the frosting, added Mrs. Margaret. You two always worked so well together in the kitchen. Laura and Ellen exchanged glances. It had been a long time since they had talked about positive childhood memories. Mom, do you remember when we built that tree house in the backyard? Asked Ellen, sitting on the other side of the armchair. Of course I remember. Your father spent a whole week helping you. He said every girl needed a castle, even if it was in an old guava tree. The three women spent the entire afternoon flipping through the album, recalling happy moments from the past. Polly occasionally contributed with phrases she had memorized over the years, bringing back memories the sisters thought they had forgotten. It was during that afternoon that Laura truly understood what she had lost by emotionally distancing herself from the family. It wasn't just the $200,000 she had taken. She had robbed herself of years of genuine time with her mother and sister. When the day ended, and it was time for Laura to leave, Mrs. Margaret held her hand. Honey, can you come more often? I really enjoyed talking with you today. I can, Mom. I can come as often as you want. The following week, something unexpected happened. Laura showed up at her mother's house on a day that wasn't her legal obligation. Ellen, surprised, opened the door and found her carrying a grocery bag. What are you doing here, Laura? I brought the ingredients to make that chocolate cake Mom remembered. I thought we could make it together. Ellen hesitated for a moment, but then opened the door completely. She'll be happy. Since yesterday, she's been asking when you'll be back. They spent the morning in the kitchen, preparing the cake under the cheerful supervision of Mrs. Margaret, who sat at the table, giving tips on the right amount of chocolate and sugar. A little more chocolate, girls. Your father always said there's no such thing as too much when it comes to chocolate. Polly, perched on his special chair, watched everything attentively and occasionally repeated, tasty cake, family cake. During the preparation, Laura found the courage to bring up something that had been bothering her for weeks. Ellen, I need to apologize for something specific. What is it? In court, I said you would never understand my responsibilities because you never married or had children. That was very cruel of me. Ellen stopped stirring the batter for a moment. It was cruel indeed. But I understand you spoke in the heat of the moment. No, it wasn't just the heat of the moment, admitted Laura. For years I felt you had an easier life than mine, that you didn't face the pressures I faced. But working at the St. Teresa nursing home, I realized you chose to give up your own family to take care of our mother. That's a sacrifice I would never be able to make. Laura, let me finish. You could have married Mark, remember? He asked you to marry him 3 times, but you always said you couldn't leave Mom alone. Ellen sighed deeply. Mark had been the great love of her life. He was an accountant at the City Hall and had insisted for years that she marry him and move to Boston, where he had gotten a better job. Mark couldn't understand that I couldn't abandon Mom, said Ellen. He said it was your responsibility to take care of her too. And he was right, said Laura, surprising her sister. "But I was so focused on my own life that I never offered to share that responsibility with you." Mrs. Margaret, who had been listening to the conversation carefully, suddenly spoke. "Girls, you both sacrificed important things for my sake. Laura sacrificed patience, and Ellen sacrificed love. But sacrifice is only worthwhile when it's done out of love, not obligation." The two daughters looked at their mother, impressed by the clarity of her thinking. "Mom, you're so lucid today," commented Ellen. "I'm lucid most of the time," replied Mrs. Margaret with a smile. "You just don't notice because you're too worried about me and forget to ask what I think." Polly flapped her wings and said, "Mum has always been wise." That afternoon, when the cake was ready, the three of them sat at the kitchen table to enjoy it with fresh coffee. It was the first time in years that the Peterson family was together, without tensions or legal obligations, simply enjoying each other's company. "Girls," said Mrs. Margaret, taking a sip of coffee, "I want to talk to you about the future." "What do you mean, Mum?" asked Ellen. "I know my mind isn't right. I know there are days I don't even remember my own name. But today I'm lucid, and I want to take this chance to say a few important things." Laura and Ellen exchanged glances, preparing for a difficult conversation. "First, Laura, I forgive you for taking my money. I understand you did it, thinking of your daughters, not out of malice." "Mom, let me finish." "Second, Ellen, I don't want you to waste the rest of your life taking care of me. You can still be happy, you can still build a family of your own." "Mom, I'm not going to abandon you." "It's not abandonment, dear. It's living. I've lived my life. I married the man I loved, raised two wonderful daughters, got to know my granddaughters. Now it's your turn to live your lives." "What are you suggesting?" asked Laura. "I'm suggesting that you two come together to take care of me, instead of one carrying this burden alone. And I'm suggesting you consider taking me to live at St. Teresa Nursing Home." The two daughters protested simultaneously. "Mom, no." "Why not? Laura works there now. She can visit me every day. Ellen can visit me whenever she wants, and you two can rebuild your own lives." "But what about Polly?" asked Ellen. "The doctor said separating you two could speed up the mental confusion." Mrs. Margaret looked at the parrot, who was focused on stealing cake crumbs. "Polly comes with me, of course. St. Teresa Retirement Home allows pets. I already asked Laura." Laura confirmed with a nod. "It's true. There are several seniors there who have their pets, and the facilities are very good. There's physical therapy, recreational activities, constant medical monitoring." "No," said Ellen categorically. "I'm not putting my mother in a home." "Ellen," said Mrs. Margaret patiently, "you're 52 years old. You can still get married. You can still have a life of your own. Don't let me be the reason you die alone." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Melissa, who came to pick up Ellen for a medical appointment for her grandmother. "Hi, Grandma." "Hi, Aunt Laura," greeted Melissa, surprised to find her aunt there outside of mandatory hours. "Wow, what a delicious smell." "We made a chocolate cake," said Mrs. Margaret cheerfully, "just like the ones I used to make when you were little." Melissa sat at the table and accepted a piece of cake. "Grandma, you look great today." "I'm feeling well. Your mother and your aunt are getting along again." Melissa looked at Ellen and then at Laura. "Is it true?" "We're trying," replied Laura. "Your mother is a much better person than I deserved as a sister." "Aunt Laura, you're not a bad person. You were just desperate. Any mother would do crazy things for her daughters." "Not any mother, Melissa. An honest mother would find another way. I chose the easy path, and it was wrong." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out now continuing. That evening, after everyone had left, Ellen and Mrs. Margaret were alone in the kitchen, finishing the dishes. "Honey, are you thinking about what I said regarding the nursing home?" "I am, Mom." "But I'm really scared to leave you there." "Why are you scared?" "I'm afraid you'll feel abandoned. I'm afraid your condition will worsen faster. I'm afraid I'll regret it later." Mrs. Margaret dried her hands on the dish towel and turned to her daughter. "Ellen, you're 52 years old and have never lived alone. You've never had the experience of waking up in the morning and deciding what you want to do with your day. You've never been able to plan a trip without worrying about me. You've never been able to date someone without wondering if they'd accept me being part of your lives. Mom, don't interrupt me. I'm saying this in my moments of clarity, so listen carefully. I want you to live your life. And I want Laura to learn how to be a real daughter, visiting her mother out of love, not obligation. Polly, who was perched on the chair, suddenly said, "Mommy wants her daughters to be happy." Mrs. Margaret smiled. See? Even Polly understands. In the days that followed, the family dynamic continued to shift slowly. Laura started showing up at her mother's house more often, not just fulfilling her legal duty, but genuinely interested in spending time with Mrs. Margaret. During one of these visits, she made a discovery that deeply moved her. She found an old notebook of her mother's, hidden in a dresser drawer, where Mrs. Margaret had written her reflections during the first months after receiving her dementia diagnosis. Today, Laura came to visit me. She only stayed 20 minutes, but I noticed she was very stressed. I know she has many responsibilities with the twin girls, but I wish she'd talk more with me. I feel like she's always in a hurry to leave when she comes here. Ellen is sacrificing so much for me. Today she turned down an invitation to dinner with Mark because it was my day to go to the doctor. I'm worried she's missing opportunities to be happy because of me. Polly is being my best companion. He notices when I'm confused and stays closer to me. Sometimes I get the impression he understands my feelings better than my own daughters. I'm afraid of what it will be like when my condition worsens. I don't want to be a burden to Laura and Ellen. They've already sacrificed so much for me all these years. Laura read the entire notebook, tears streaming down her face. Each entry revealed a lucid woman concerned about her daughter's well-being, not a confused person detached from the world around her. When Ellen arrived home, she found Laura crying in the living room, with the notebook in her hands. "What happened?" asked Ellen, alarmed. "Read this," said Laura, handing her the notebook. Ellen read a few pages and also began to cry. "She knew everything," murmured Ellen. "She knew I was giving up my life for her." "She knew you were pulling away. And yet she only worried about our happiness," added Laura. The two sisters remained seated in silence for a few minutes, absorbing the impact of those revelations. "Ellen, maybe Mom is right about the nursing home," said Laura finally. "You think so?" "I do. If I work there, I can take care of her daily. You can visit her whenever you want, and both of us can rebuild our own lives, knowing she's well cared for and surrounded by other people in the same situation. But what if she doesn't adjust? Then we bring her back home, but it's worth trying." That night, the two of them discussed the matter with Mrs. Margaret, who was having one of her more lucid days. "Mum, we've decided we're going to get to know St. Teresa Retirement Home better before making a final decision," said Ellen. "That's wonderful, dear. I'm sure you'll like what you see there." "And what about Polly? Will she adjust well?" asked Laura. "Polly adapts anywhere I'm comfortable," replied Mrs. Margaret. "She's wiser than many people I know." Polly, as if understanding they were talking about her, said, "Wherever Mommy goes, I go." The following Saturday, Laura took Ellen and Mrs. Margaret to visit St. Teresa Retirement Home. The place was very different from what Ellen had imagined. Instead of dark hallways and depressing rooms, she found a cheerful environment with well-kept gardens, cozy common areas, and an atmosphere that felt more like a hotel than an institution. "Mrs. Laura," greeted Mr. Anthony, approaching the group. "Is this your family?" "Yes, Mr. Anthony. This is my mother Margaret and my sister Ellen." Mr. Anthony extended his hand to Mrs. Margaret. "Very pleased to meet you, Mrs. Margaret. Your daughter is an angel here at the home. She takes care of all of us with such affection." Mrs. Margaret looked at Laura with pride. "I always knew she had a good heart. Sometimes it just needs a little nudge to show." During the tour, they met other residents and their families. They discovered that many seniors had come there for similar reasons. Children who could no longer provide adequate care at home, but visited regularly and actively participated in their parents' lives. Mrs. Eunice, 90 years old, showed them her room decorated with family photos and personal items. "At first, I cried every day," admitted Mrs. Eunice. "I thought my children were abandoning me. But then I understood they were giving me the chance to make new friends and have medical care they couldn't provide at home. "And are you happy here?" asked Ellen. "I'm very happy. I have friends, I join activities, I get visits whenever I want. And best of all, my children aren't exhausted from taking care of me anymore. When they visit, we truly enjoy our time together." In the afternoon, the home's director, Dr. Marina Sullivan, showed them the medical facilities and explained the residents' daily routine. "We have physical therapy, occupational therapy, recreational activities, along with constant medical monitoring," explained Dr. Marina. "For cases like Mrs. Margaret's, we have a specific program for people with dementia, which includes cognitive stimulation and emotional support." "What about pets?" asked Mrs. Margaret. "We allow and even encourage them. Studies show pets significantly help seniors' emotional well-being, especially those with memory issues." Polly, who had been accompanying the tour in a special carrier, suddenly started talking. "Pretty place. Nice people." Everyone laughed at the parrot's spontaneity. "It seems Polly approves," commented Dr. Marina. By the end of the visit, Mrs. Margaret was visibly tired, but seemed at peace with the idea. "Girls, I liked it here," she said on the way back home. "The people are kind. The place is clean and organized, and it seems like I wouldn't be a burden to anyone." "Mom, you've never been a burden," said Ellen, holding her mother's hand. "I know you don't see me that way, dear, but I feel that way sometimes, especially when I forget important things or when you have to cancel your plans because of me." Laura, who was driving, looked in the rearview mirror. "Mom, if you decide to go to the home, I promise I'll visit you every day, not out of obligation, but because I want to be near you. And I promise I'll pick you up whenever you want to come spend a few days at home," added Ellen. "It would be nice to have that option," admitted Mrs. Margaret. "Some days there, some days at home. The best of both worlds." 2 weeks later, after many family discussions and careful planning, Mrs. Margaret moved to St. Teresa Retirement Home. Not as a permanent resident, but as a new phase in her life where she would have specialized care, and her daughters could visit her regularly without the pressure of being full-time caregivers. Polly adapted quickly to the new environment. In fact, she became an attraction at the home, chatting with other residents and repeating funny phrases that brightened everyone's day. "Good morning, everyone," Polly would shout every morning when the nurse opened the curtains in Mrs. Margaret's room. "Polly is better than an alarm clock," Mrs. Eunice would joke. Laura faithfully kept her promise to visit her mother every day. But now her visits had a different purpose. Instead of arriving in a rush and leaving quickly, she spent hours talking with Mrs. Margaret, helping with recreational activities and getting to know the other residents better. It was during one of these visits that Laura met Mrs. Connie, an 83-year-old lady who had been abandoned by her children after developing Alzheimer's. "My children changed their phone numbers, so I couldn't call them," Mrs. Connie shared during a crafts activity. "It's been 2 years since I've heard from any of my 3 children." Laura was deeply moved by the story. "Mrs. Connie, do you know where they live?" "I do, but I don't have the courage to show up there. What if they send me away?" Laura thought about her own situation. If it weren't for the parrot's intervention and Judge William's wisdom, she might have continued distancing herself from her mother until they reached a point similar to Mrs. Connie's. "Mrs. Connie, if you'd like, I can help you get in touch with your children." "You would do that?" "Yes, I would. Everyone deserves a second chance." Laura spent the following week investigating the whereabouts of Mrs. Connie's children. She discovered that one of them, Robert, worked at an auto repair shop just 15 miles from Pine Creek. On Friday, she decided to visit Robert during his lunch break. "Robert Smith," Laura asked, approaching a middle-aged man who was eating lunch in the outdoor area of the shop. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" "My name is Laura. I work at St. Teresa Retirement Home where your mother is living." Robert's face immediately closed off. "I don't want to know about my mother." "May I ask why?" "Ma'am, with all due respect, that's none of your business." "Robert, your mother talks about you every day. She knows you changed your phone numbers so she couldn't call." Robert lowered his eyes, visibly uncomfortable. "My mother has Alzheimer's. She doesn't remember anything." "She remembers you. She remembers you played soccer as a child. She remembers you liked to help her in the kitchen on Sundays. She remembers you promised to take care of her when your father passed away." "Stop," Robert said, standing up. I can't take care of my mother. I have my own family, my own problems. No one is asking you to take care of her. She's well cared for at the home. I'm just asking you to visit her. Robert walked a few steps, clearly conflicted. You don't understand. My mother, she was very difficult. She was always controlling, always criticizing everything I did. When she started getting confused, it got even worse. She would yell at me, accuse me of stealing from her, say I was an ungrateful son. And now? How is she now? I don't know. I haven't seen her in 2 years. Robert, your mother has changed. The illness has matured her in a strange way. She's more affectionate, kinder, and most of all, she's very lonely. Robert remained silent for a few minutes. If I go there and she starts yelling at me? If she yells, you can leave. But what if she doesn't scream? What if she's happy to see him? Robert looked at Laura with an expression that mixed hope and fear. Do you really think it's worth trying? I do, and I can go with you on the first visit, if you want. The following Sunday, Robert accompanied Laura to St. Teresa Retirement Home. He was visibly nervous, his hands sweating and constantly adjusting his shirt. Robert, if your mother doesn't recognize you right away, don't be upset. Some days she's more lucid than others. They found Mrs. Connie in the garden, participating in a group reading activity. Mrs. Connie, Laura called softly, I brought a special visitor for you. Mrs. Connie looked up and stood still for a few seconds, observing Robert. Robert, she murmured, incredulous. Hi, Mom. Mrs. Connie rose slowly and walked to her son. To Robert's surprise, she didn't scream or make accusations. Instead, she extended trembling hands and touched his face. My son, you've grown so much, she said tenderly. I was so afraid I'd never see you again. Robert began to cry, hugging his mother for the first time in years. Mom, forgive me for abandoning you. No need to ask for forgiveness, son. You're here now. That's what matters. Laura watched the scene with teary eyes, thinking of her own reconciliation with Mrs. Margaret. Sometimes a second chance was all a family needed to reunite. While Robert and Mrs. Connie talked in the garden, Laura went to visit her own mother, who was in her room, teaching Polly to repeat an old song. Hi, Mum, how was your day today? It was good, dear. I taught a new song to Polly. Want to hear it? Yes, I do. Mrs. Margaret signaled to the parrot, which immediately began humming a slightly off-key version of Ring Around the Rosie. He's getting better, Laura laughed. Yes, he is. Polly is very diligent when he wants to learn something new. Mother and daughter spent the afternoon chatting about trivialities, but with a closeness that hadn't existed for years. Laura told about her work at the home, about the people she had met, about Robert and Mrs. Connie. You're doing beautiful work here, dear, said Mrs. Margaret. Thank you, Mom. I think I've finally found my place. And Ellen, how is she? Ellen is different, lighter. She's going out more, talking to new people. Last week she went to dinner with Mark. Mark, the one who wanted to marry her. That's the one. They met by chance at the supermarket. He's divorced now and said he never forgot her. Mrs. Margaret smiled. That's good. Ellen deserves to be happy. And me, Mom. Do I deserve to be happy too? Of course you do, dear. You made a mistake, but you're doing everything to make it right. That's what defines a person, not the mistakes they make, but how they react to them. Polly, who had been quiet during the conversation, suddenly said, Everyone deserves a second chance. The two women looked at the parrot and laughed. Polly is very wise, commented Mrs. Margaret. Yes, he is. Sometimes I think he understands people better than people themselves do. That night, when Laura arrived home, she found a surprise waiting for her. John Carter had prepared dinner and set the table with candles and flowers. What's this? Asked Laura, surprised. It's an apology, replied John Carter, and an attempt at a fresh start. Apology for what? For doubting you, for not realizing you were going through a tough time, for not being the husband you needed when the girls were having problems in college. Laura sat at the table, moved. John Carter, you have nothing to apologize for. I'm the one who committed the crime. Laura, we've lived together for 30 years. I should have realized you were desperate. I should have helped find an honest solution to the girls' problems. It wasn't your duty to solve my problems. Yes, it was. We're a family. When one of us is suffering, everyone should be suffering. When one makes a mistake, everyone should be willing to help fix it. They dined while talking about the future, about how to rebuild trust among themselves, and how to support their twin daughters in their new life decisions. Jessica and Jennifer had decided to temporarily pause college and work to save enough money to resume their studies honestly. They were working at a local restaurant and discovering that the experience of earning their own money was more rewarding than they had imagined. "Dad, I found out I like working in the kitchen," Jessica had said during a recent visit. "I'm thinking about changing my major. Instead of business administration, maybe I'll study culinary arts. And I found out I have a knack for dealing with customers," Jennifer had added. "Maybe I'll study hospitality instead of accounting." John Carter had been proud to see his daughters discovering new talents and interests through work. 3 months after Mrs. Margaret moved to St. Teresa Retirement Home, the Peterson family had found a new balance. Laura continued serving her community service, but now saw her work as a vocation, not an obligation. She had enrolled in a distance geriatrics course and dreamed of specializing in elderly care. Ellen was rediscovering her own identity. After decades of caring for her mother, she finally had time to explore her own interests. She had started taking an embroidery class and was considering opening a small craft business. The relationship with Mark had evolved slowly. They weren't in a hurry. Both knew that sometimes second chances were even more precious than the first ones. Mrs. Margaret was flourishing at St. Teresa Retirement Home. Surrounded by people in similar situations, she no longer felt like a burden to anyone. She actively participated in activities, had made new friends, and on her more lucid days even helped care for other residents who were in more advanced stages of the disease. Polly had become the official mascot of the home. He freely roamed the halls, chatting with residents and staff, brightening everyone's day with his spontaneous and sometimes profound phrases. It was on one such occasion that Polly starred in another memorable moment. Mrs. Mercy, a 95-year-old lady who rarely spoke due to advanced Alzheimer's, was having a particularly difficult day. She was constantly crying and not responding to any attempts at communication from the staff. Polly landed on the arm of the chair where Mrs. Mercy was sitting and began humming an old song, Country Moonlight. To everyone's surprise, Mrs. Mercy stopped crying and began humming along with the Parrot. "How did he know that was her favorite song?" asked the nurse, moved. "Polly has a special gift for understanding people," replied Laura. "He always knew exactly what each person needed to hear." The story of Polly and his role as a witness in court had spread far beyond Pine Creek. Journalists from various cities in Vermont had visited the home to meet the parrot that changed a family. Judge William, now retired, also made several visits to the home to follow the unfolding of the story that had marked his last year on the bench. "Dr. William," said Laura during one of his visits, "do you think you made the right decision?" "Laura, in 45 years of my career, I've rarely seen a family transform so much for the better after a court ruling. Usually, family legal battles leave everyone bitter and resentful. In your case, it seems justice truly worked as it should, not just punishing a mistake, but healing a family. All thanks to Polly." "No, Laura. All thanks to the love you have for each other. Polly just revealed what was already in your hearts." One afternoon, 6 months after the sentencing, the entire Peterson family gathered in the garden of St. Teresa Retirement Home for a special celebration. It was Mrs. Margaret's 86th birthday, and for the first time in years, she was surrounded by all the people she loved. Laura had decorated one of the common rooms with flowers and old family photos. Ellen had prepared her mother's favorite chocolate cake. John Carter had brought a guitar to play the old songs Mrs. Margaret liked. Jessica and Jennifer had taken the day off work to be present. Melissa was there with her new boyfriend, whom she'd met in the nursing course she decided to take, inspired by the care she saw her mother and grandmother exchange. Mark was also invited and brought a special gift for Mrs. Margaret, a CD with all the songs she used to hum when Ellen was a child. "Mrs. Margaret, happy birthday," said Mark, handing over the gift. "Thank you, Mark. You're a good young man. Take good care of my Ellen." "I will, you can count on it." Robert had arrived with Mrs. Connie, who now received regular visits from her son and grandchildren. Their reconciliation had inspired other residents' children to reconnect with their parents. "Mrs. Laura," said Robert, "I don't know how to thank you for what you did for our family." "Robert, I did nothing but give a little nudge. The love between you was already there. It was just hidden beneath old resentments." During the party, Polly moved among the guests, repeating affectionate phrases and making everyone laugh with his spontaneous comments. "Family united!" he shouted periodically. "Polly is right," said Mrs. Margaret, blowing out the candles on the cake. "A united family is the greatest gift a mother can receive." In the late afternoon, as guests began to leave, Laura and Ellen were alone with their mother in the garden. "Girls, I want to thank you both." "Thank us for what, Mom?" asked Ellen. "For teaching me that family isn't about perfection. It's about forgiveness, understanding, and second chances." "Mom, we learned that from you," said Laura. "No, daughters. You learned it on your own. I was just lucky enough to be here to witness that learning." Polly, perched on the chair next to Mrs. Margaret, suddenly said something none of them had heard before. "Daddy is proud. He's watching everything from heaven." The three women looked at each other, moved. There was no way Polly could know about the family's religious beliefs, or how much they missed the patriarch. "How did he know that?" murmured Ellen. "Polly has always known everything," replied Mrs. Margaret serenely. "From the first day he arrived in our home, he's been the guardian of the Peterson family's secrets and feelings." "And now," asked Laura, "what does Polly guard now?" Polly tilted his head, as if thinking, and then said, "Now I guard love. Only love." That night, as Laura drove back home, she thought about how her life had completely changed in less than a year. It had started with her as a desperate woman who had committed a crime against her own mother. Now she was a dedicated daughter, a respected worker, and a person who had found her purpose in life. John Carter was waiting for her at home with a cup of hot tea and a smile on his face. How was the party? It was perfect. Mum was radiant. Ellen was happy. The girls were proud. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly part of a family. "You've always been part of the family, Laura. You just lost your way for a time." "That's true. But Polly helped me find myself again. That parrot is really special." "He's more than special, John Carter. He's proof that sometimes wisdom comes from the most unexpected places." 2 years later, the Peterson family had become an example in the Pine Creek community. Laura had completed her geriatrics course and been promoted to assistant coordinator of St. Teresa Retirement Home. She had created an innovative family reunification program, helping other children reconcile with their elderly parents. Ellen had married Mark in a simple yet moving ceremony held in the garden of St. Teresa Retirement Home, so Mrs. Margaret could be present. Polly had been the ring bearer, carrying the rings on a small cushion tied to his feet. The twin daughters had resumed their studies, but now in courses that truly excited them. Jessica was studying culinary arts and already dreaming of opening a restaurant specializing in home-cooked meals. Jennifer was in the hospitality course and interning at Pine Creek's only hotel. Mrs. Margaret continued living at St. Teresa Retirement Home, but now spent every weekend at Ellen's house. Her condition had stabilized, alternating between clearer days and more confused ones, but always surrounded by love and care. Judge William had written a book about unusual cases from his career, dedicating an entire chapter to the case of the Parrot witness. The book became a regional success and brought even more attention to the Peterson family's story. Polly, now 25 years old, remained the star of St. Teresa Retirement Home. He had trained other therapy pets and become the leader of a group of animals that helped the elderly residents' well-being. On a sunny spring morning, Laura was in the retirement home's garden, helping residents with a planting activity, when Polly landed on her shoulder. "Laura is a good daughter," he said out of the blue. "Thank you, Polly. Do you really think so?" "I do. You've learned that love is more important than money." Laura stopped what she was doing and looked at the parrot. "Polly, do you remember everything that happened in court?" "I remember. It was important. The truth needed to come out." "And you're not angry with me for what I did to my mother?" "I'm not angry. Everyone makes mistakes. But I want to What matters is fixing them. You're very wise, Polly. I'm not wise. I just listen a lot. And when you listen a lot, you learn a lot. Laura smiled, understanding that Polly had, once again, taught a valuable lesson. Perhaps wisdom truly lay in listening to others, listening to one's own needs, and listening to what the heart had to say. That afternoon, the entire Peterson family gathered for Sunday lunch at Ellen's house. It was a tradition they had established 2 years earlier and had become the most special moment of the week for everyone. Mrs. Margaret was seated at the head of the table, with Polly perched on a special chair beside her. Laura and John Carter were on one side with the twin daughters. On the other side, Ellen and Mark chatted animatedly about plans for their belated honeymoon, which they would finally take the following month. "Mom, would you like me to take care of Polly while Ellen is traveling?" asked Laura. "No need, dear. Polly will stay at the home with me. He likes it there. And I'll visit every day to make sure you're both doing well," added Melissa, who now worked as a nurse at the town hospital. "You all take such good care of each other," observed Mark. "It's beautiful to see." "It wasn't always like this," admitted Laura. "There was a time when our family was nearly falling apart." "But the important thing is that you found your way back," said John Carter. "Thanks to Polly," added Jennifer. Polly raised her head upon hearing her name. "Polly only spoke the truth," he said. "The truth was always there. You just weren't listening." "And now?" asked Jessica. "What do you hear now?" Polly fell silent for a few seconds, as if he were truly listening to something. Then, with a clarity that impressed everyone, he said, "I hear a lot of love. I hear people who have learned to forgive themselves. I hear a family that discovered lost time can be recovered when there's a will to start over." The silence that followed was different from that first silence in the courtroom 2 years ago. This was a silence of contemplation, of gratitude, and of peace. "Polly," said Mrs. Margaret finally, "you are the best gift this family has ever received." "No," replied the parrot, tilting his head toward the matriarch. "You are my gift, a family that knew how to find each other again." As lunch continued, with cheerful conversations and sincere laughter, no one could imagine that just 2 years earlier they had been in a courtroom, facing the possibility of a permanent breakup. The story of the parrot who testified in court had become a legend in Pine Creek. But for the Peterson family, it was much more than a curious story. It was a symbol that the truth, when spoken with love and accepted with humility, had the power to heal even the deepest wounds. That night, when everyone had left, Ellen and Mark were alone in the kitchen finishing washing the dishes. "Do you regret anything?" asked Mark. "What?" "Waiting so long to rebuild your family, dedicating so many years only to caring for your mother." Ellen thought for a moment before answering. "I don't regret it, Mark. Every moment was necessary to get here. If things had happened differently, perhaps our family wouldn't have learned the lessons it needed to learn." "And about us? Do you regret losing so many years we could have spent together? Mark, the years we lost brought us wisdom. Now we know how to value what we have. We know that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice, it's dedication, it's forgiveness." "You're right, and besides, Polly approves of our relationship. That has to mean something." Both laughed, remembering how the parrot always got excited when Mark came for visits. The following week, something happened that no one was expecting. Dr. Charles Edward Ferguson, the veterinarian who had evaluated Polly during the legal process, showed up at St. Teresa Retirement Home with an unusual proposal. "Laura, I'd like to propose a special project involving Polly." "What kind of project, Doctor?" "The University of Vermont wants to create an assisted pet therapy program, specifically for elderly people with dementia. We'd like Polly to be the model for training other animals and their caregivers." "Would that mean he'd have to travel to Boston?" "Occasionally, yes, but most of the work would be done right here with researchers coming to Pine Creek." Laura thought about the proposal. It was an honor, but also an additional responsibility. "I need to talk to my mother and to Polly." "To Polly?" Dr. Charles Edward smiled. "Yes, he has very clear opinions about everything, and they're usually right." When Laura presented the proposal to Mrs. Margaret and Polly, The parrot's response was immediate. Helping other people is good. Polly likes to help. But you'd have to travel sometimes, Polly. You wouldn't always be near Grandma Margaret. Mommy can come along, replied Polly, as if it were obvious. Son, I can't travel, said Mrs. Margaret patiently. Why not? You're doing well. The doctor said you're doing well. Mrs. Margaret looked at Laura. Do you really think I could travel to Boston sometimes? Mum, I don't know. We'd have to ask Dr. Robert if it's safe. Dr. Robert Mitchell was the geriatrician responsible for Mrs. Margaret's care. When consulted about the possibility of short trips to Boston, his response was positive. Mrs. Margaret is stable. Short trips with proper supervision could even be beneficial. Changes in environment often provide cognitive stimulation for people with dementia. And that's how Polly officially became a pet therapy consultant for the University of Vermont. Once a month, he and Mrs. Margaret traveled to Boston, accompanied by Laura or Ellen, to help train other animals and caregivers. The project was a tremendous success. Within 2 years, dozens of nursing homes across the state of Vermont had implemented pet therapy programs based on the model developed with Polly. During one of these trips, something happened that deeply marked the entire Peterson family. Mrs. Margaret was participating in a demonstration session with veterinary students when suddenly she had an exceptional moment of clarity. Professor, she said, addressing Dr. Charles Edward, may I make a comment? Of course, Mrs. Margaret. You're studying Polly because you think he's special. But I want you to understand something. Polly isn't special because he's a clever parrot. He's special because he had a family that loved him for 25 years. The students paid attention to the elderly woman's words. She continued, Animals reflect the environment they live in. If Polly is wise, affectionate, and capable of understanding human feelings, it's because he grew up in a home where those values existed, even when we humans forgot to show them. Mrs. Margaret, said one of the students, are you saying any animal can develop these abilities? I'm saying love generates love. Care generates care. If you want to train animals to help the elderly, don't focus only on techniques. Focus on the genuine affection these animals need to receive before they can offer it back. Dr. Charles Edward was impressed by the depth of her observation. Mrs. Margaret, would you like to participate as a speaker in our seminars? Professor, I have dementia. Some days I don't even remember my own name. But today you're lucid and have valuable insights to share. If you think I can help, I'd be happy to participate. And that's how Mrs. Margaret became an occasional speaker at pet therapy seminars, always accompanied by Polly, who complimented her observations with spontaneous comments that often surprised and educated the audience. During one of these lectures, a student asked, Mrs. Margaret, how did you know Polly would be a reliable witness in court? I didn't know, she answered honestly, but my daughter Ellen trusted him, and I've always trusted Ellen's intuition. Sometimes you need to have faith in those you love, even when you don't fully understand their decisions. And what if Polly had lied? Polly never lied in 25 years of life. Why would he start at that moment? Animals don't lie. They might get confused, but they don't lie intentionally like human beings. Polly never lies, confirmed the parrot himself. Lying is for complicated people. The audience laughed, but also reflected on the simplicity and depth of the observation. 3 years after the famous trial, the Parrot witness case had been cited in academic papers, news reports, and even in a documentary produced by Vermont Educational Television. But for the Peterson family, the true victory wasn't in fame or recognition. It was in the fact that they had learned to communicate, to forgive each other, and to value the time they had together. Laura had become a respected specialist in geriatrics and family therapy. She often received invitations to speak about family reconciliation in other cities, always bringing Polly as a co-speaker. Ellen and Mark had built a solid marriage based on mutual respect and understanding. They didn't have biological children, but became important parental figures for Melissa and a role model couple for Laura's twin daughters. John Carter had retired and decided to dedicate part of his time to volunteer work at St. Teresa Retirement Home, helping other families deal with similar issues to what his family had faced. The twins, Jessica and Jennifer, had graduated and were building their own careers. but always kept family as their priority. They had learned, through their mother's traumatic experience, that professional success without personal integrity had no value. Melissa had become a nurse specialized in geriatrics and worked at the Boston Hospital, but visited Pine Creek every weekend. And Mrs. Margaret. She continued to be the heart of the family, alternating between moments of impressive clarity and periods of confusion, but always surrounded by love and care. It was during the 4th anniversary of the court ruling that the family decided to organize a special celebration. Not a celebration of the crime Laura had committed, but a celebration of the transformation they had all undergone. The event was held in the Pine Creek Community Hall, and to everyone's surprise, not only relatives and friends attended, but also other families who had been inspired by the Petersons' story to resolve their own conflicts. Robert was there with Mrs. Connie and his reunited family. Several families of residents from St. Teresa Retirement Home attended. Dr. Charles Edward Ferguson came from Boston, especially for the event. Judge William, even though retired, made sure to be present. "Peterson family," said the former magistrate during his speech, "you taught me that true justice isn't just about punishing mistakes, but about creating opportunities for people to grow and become better versions of themselves." "Dr. William," replied Laura, "you gave us a second chance when you could have simply applied the maximum punishment. That changed our lives. The second chance already existed in your hearts. I just helped reveal it." During the party, Polly circulated among the guests, greeting familiar people and demonstrating her social personality that had developed even more in recent years. "Polly, do you remember the day in court?" asked a child present. "Remember" was important. Family was broken, needed fixing. "And you weren't scared?" "Not scared to tell truth. Truth is good. Lie is bad." "Polly, what's the secret to a happy family?" asked another guest. The parrot thought for a few seconds, tilting her head as she always did when a question required reflection. "Secret is listening. Listening with heart, not just with ear. And forgiving. Forgiving is important. And saying, 'I love you,' every day." "Polly is very wise," commented an elderly lady. "Not wise. Just lived long time with good people. When you live with good people, learn to be good too." At the end of the party, when all the guests had left, the Peterson family gathered in a circle in the hall's garden. It was a tradition they had created. Whenever they were all together, they formed a circle to talk about gratitude. "What are you grateful for today?" asked Mrs. Margaret, starting the family ritual. "I'm grateful for learning that love is more important than pride," said Laura. "I'm grateful for finding the courage to build my own life without abandoning my family," said Ellen. "I'm grateful for having a wife who knew how to grow from her mistakes," said John Carter. "We're grateful for having parents who taught us that integrity is worth more than money," said Jessica and Jennifer, almost in unison. "I'm grateful for being part of a family that knew how to reinvent itself," said Mark. "I'm grateful for having a family that loves me even when my mind doesn't work right," said Mrs. Margaret Peterson. "I'm grateful for having a grandma who teaches me every day that love is the best medicine," said Melissa. Everyone looked at Polly, waiting for his contribution. "I'm grateful," he said solemnly, "for having a family that never gave up on love." As the sun set over Pine Creek, the Peterson family remained there, in silence, contemplating the journey they had traveled together. From despair to hope, from crime to forgiveness, from separation to reunion. "Polly," said Mrs. Margaret finally, "do you think Daddy would be proud of us?" "Daddy was always proud," replied Polly. "Even when you were fighting, he was proud, because he knew love was still there, hidden away, waiting for the right time to appear." "How do you know that?" asked Ellen. "Because true love never leaves. It might stay hidden, it might stay hurt, but it never leaves, and Daddy knew that." That night, each member of the Peterson family returned to their respective homes with hearts full of gratitude and peace. They knew they would still face challenges, misses. Margaret's condition would continue progressing. There would be other financial difficulties, other moments of tension. But now they knew something fundamental: a family that learns to communicate honestly, forgive genuinely, and love unconditionally, is capable of overcoming any obstacle. And whenever they needed to remember this lesson, they just had to look at Polly, who would continue being the living memory that sometimes the deepest wisdom comes from the most unexpected places. 5 years after the famous trial, Polly turned 30 years old, an impressive milestone for his species. The birthday party was held at St. Teresa Retirement Home and was attended by dozens of people whose lives had been touched by the witness Parrot's story. During the party, Laura gave an emotional speech. "Polly, when you came into our home 3 decades ago, we were an ordinary family with our flaws and qualities. You witnessed our growth, our mistakes, our fall and our rebuilding, and more than that, you were the instrument that helped us find each other again." "I wasn't an instrument," interrupted Polly. "I was just family. Family takes care of family." "You're right," laughed Laura. "You always were and always will be family." Mrs. Margaret, now 89 years old and in a wheelchair but still lucid most of the time, held Laura's hand. "Daughter, you've become a wonderful woman. Your father would be proud." "Thank you, Mum. Everything I learned about love and forgiveness I learned from you and our family." "And from Polly," added Mrs. Margaret. "Never forget to give credit to Polly." "Polly doesn't need credit," said the one in question. "Polly just wants family to stay together. And it will," promised Ellen. "Forever." As the party continued with laughter, stories, and much celebration, no one could imagine that in a few months they would receive news that would test once again the strength of the family bonds they had built. Dr. Charles Edward Ferguson appeared at St. Teresa Retirement Home on a fall morning with a serious expression on his face. "Laura, I need to talk to you about Polly." "What happened, Doctor? Is he sick?" "Not exactly sick, but—" "Laura, Polly is getting older. The exam we did last week shows some signs of natural decline for his age." "What kind of decline?" "Reduced activity, some coordination problems, decreased appetite. These are normal signs for a 30-year-old parrot, but—" "But what?" "But it indicates he's entering the final stage of his life. It could be a matter of months, it could be 1 or 2 years. There's no way to predict exactly." Laura felt as if the world had stopped. Polly wasn't just a pet. He was the heart of the family, the keeper of their memories, the symbol of their unity. "Dr. Charles Edward, is there anything we can do to prolong—" "Laura, the best thing you can do is keep giving Polly exactly what you've always given him. Lots of love and a close-knit family. That's what will make his remaining time as happy as possible." That night, Laura gathered the whole family to share the news. The reaction was one of deep sadness, but also of determination to make the most of the time they still had with Polly. "Let's make a list of all the things Polly likes to do," suggested Jennifer, "and we'll make sure he does all of them." "He likes listening to old music," said Mrs. Margaret. "He likes looking at family photos," added Ellen. "He likes visiting the garden and seeing the flowers," said Melissa. "He likes talking with the other residents of the home," completed Laura. During the weeks that followed, Polly received more attention and affection than he had ever received in his entire life. Not because he was dying, but because the family had understood the value of showing love while there was still time. Polly, in turn, seemed to understand that he was being especially pampered and accepted all the attention with his characteristic wisdom. "You're sad because Polly is leaving," he said one afternoon. "But you don't need to be sad." "Why not, Polly?" asked Ellen. "Because Polly is never really leaving. Polly will stay here." He touched Ellen's chest with his foot, and here, touched Laura's, and here. He turned to Mrs. Margaret. "You'll stay in our hearts," said Mrs. Margaret with tears in her eyes. "Exactly. And every time you remember to forgive, to love, to speak the truth, you'll remember Polly." "Polly," said Laura, "is there anything special you'd like to do?" "I want the whole family to take a picture together, a big picture with everyone." The following Sunday, they organized a professional photo session in the garden of St. Teresa Retirement Home. The whole Peterson family was present. Laura and John Carter, Ellen and Mark, Jessica and Jennifer with their respective boyfriends, Melissa with her fiancé, Mrs. Margaret in her wheelchair, and in the center of it all, Polly perched on a stand specially decorated for the occasion. "This photo will hang in our living room forever," promised Laura. "And in ours too," said Ellen. "And here at the home," added the director, Dr. Marina, who had become a friend of the family over the years. "Polly liked the photo," said the Parrot himself. "Now Polly is happy." The last months of Polly's life were marked by an emotional intensity and a family unity even greater than they had experienced in previous years. Every visit was precious, every conversation was memorable, every moment together was a treasure. During this period, something surprising happened. Polly started teaching new words and phrases to the other animals at the home, as if he wanted to ensure that his wisdom would be preserved even after his departure. "Polly, why are you teaching so much to the other little animals?" asked Melissa during a visit. "Because good knowledge must be shared. It can't die with those who know it." "What kind of knowledge are you teaching?" "I'm teaching that love is the most important thing, that truth is always better than lies, that forgiveness heals everything, that family is forever." And truly, in the following months, the other pets at the home began displaying surprising behaviors. The cat Whiskers started purring specifically when elderly residents were sad. The dog Buddy learned to sit beside residents who were feeling lonely. "It's as if Polly is creating an animal therapy school," observed Dr. Charles Edward Ferguson. "Polly was always a teacher," replied Mrs. Margaret Peterson. "He taught us how to be a real family." On Christmas Eve 2025, Polly was noticeably weaker. His voice, once strong and clear, was now softer. His movements, once agile, were now slower and deliberate. The entire family gathered in the living room of St. Teresa Retirement Home to spend Christmas night together. It was their tradition to open one gift each at midnight. "Polly," said Mrs. Margaret, "what is your final Christmas wish?" The Parrot took a few seconds to respond. "Polly wants you to promise one thing." "Anything," they all said almost simultaneously. "Do you promise you'll remain a united family even when Polly is no longer here?" "We promise," said Laura, crying. "Do you promise you'll tell Polly's story to other families who are fighting?" "We promise," said Ellen. "Do you promise you'll remember that love is stronger than any problem?" "We promise," said the whole family in chorus. "Then Polly can leave in peace." "You're not leaving now, are you?" asked Jennifer, alarmed. "Not now, but when the time comes. And you can't be sad forever. A little sadness is normal. Too much sadness is harmful." "How will we know when it's time to stop being sad?" asked John Carter. "When you remember Polly and smile instead of cry. When you remember all the good things you learned together." Polly lived 3 more months after that Christmas. In his final days, he was too weak to speak much, but whenever the family gathered around him, he made an effort to say a few words of affection or wisdom. On March 15, 2026, on a sunny autumn morning, Polly closed his eyes for the last time. He was on his favorite perch in the garden of St. Teresa Retirement Home, surrounded by Mrs. Margaret, Laura, and Ellen. His last words were, "Thank you for the beautiful family." Polly was very happy. Polly's funeral was held in the garden of St. Teresa Retirement Home and was attended by over 100 people. Besides the Peterson family, other home residents, staff, relatives of other elderly residents, community members who had followed the story over the years, and even representatives from the University of Vermont were present. Judge William, despite his advanced age, made sure to be there. "Polly was one of the most honest witnesses to ever pass through my courtroom," he said during his speech. "More than that, he was a life teacher for all of us." Dr. Charles Edward created a commemorative plaque that was installed in the home's garden. "Polly Peterson, 1995-2026, Guardian of Truth, Teacher of Love, Symbol of Family Unity." "The plaque is beautiful," said Mrs. Margaret, observing it with approval. "But Polly's true memorial isn't here." "Where is it, Mom?" asked Ellen. "It's in the family he helped build. It's in the love you learned to show. It's in the capacity for forgiveness you developed. It's in the honesty you came to value." In the months that followed, the Peterson family faced their grief in a healthy way. They felt a sense of longing, cried when necessary, but also celebrated the extraordinary life that Polly had lived alongside them. Laura created a program at St. Teresa Retirement Home called Project Polly, which offered animal-assisted therapy for elderly individuals with dementia. The program was a success and soon expanded to other nursing homes in the region. Ellen wrote a book telling the full story of the family, from the crime to the reconciliation, with a special focus on the role that Polly had played. The book became a regional bestseller and was later adapted into a film produced by the Educational Television. The family established a tradition. Every March 15th, the anniversary of Polly's death, they would gather in the garden of St. Teresa Retirement Home to share memories and renew their commitments to one another. 2 years after Polly's passing, Mrs. Margaret also completed her earthly journey. She passed away peacefully in her sleep at 91 years old, surrounded by the love of her daughters. In her last conscious moments, she had said, "I'm going to meet Polly. He must be waiting for me with so many stories to tell." Mrs. Margaret's funeral was a celebration of her life and the legacy she had left behind, a united, loving family capable of overcoming any adversity. During the wake, something magical happened. A green parrot landed on the window of the room where the ceremony was being held. No one knew where it had come from, but it remained there throughout the farewell, silently watching. "It's Polly," whispered Jennifer. "He came to get Grandma." "Don't be silly," said Jessica, but she too was moved by the coincidence. At the exact moment when Mrs. Margaret's casket was being taken to the cemetery, the unknown parrot flew alongside the procession for a few meters and then disappeared into the horizon. "Coincidence or not," said Judge William, who was also present, "it was a beautiful way for her to go." "Grandma always said that Polly would take her to see heaven," commented Melissa, "and perhaps that's exactly what happened," concluded Laura. End of the story. 10 years after the famous trial of the witness parrot, the Peterson family's story continued to inspire people throughout the United States. Ellen's book had been translated into several languages, the film had won awards at independent film festivals, and the case had become study material in law schools and family therapy courses. But for Laura, Ellen, and the rest of the family, the true success was not in the public recognition. It was in the fact that they had learned to live with integrity, honesty, and unconditional love. The family continued to gather every Sunday to have lunch together. They still visited Mrs. Margaret's grave and Polly's memorial in the garden of St. Teresa Retirement Home. They kept telling their story to other families facing similar conflicts, and whenever someone asked what the secret to the Peterson family's reconciliation was, the answer was always the same: the truth. The truth spoken with love and accepted with humility. Because the truth, no matter how hard it is to hear, always sets you free. And love, no matter how wounded it may be, always finds a way to heal. And so, the story of the parrot who testified in court and changed a family forever became a symbol of hope for all those who believe that it is never too late to start over, never too hard to forgive, and never too impossible to love. Now tell us what you thought of the story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave it in the comments with sincere words. Do you believe that Polly really understood everything that happened in the Peterson family? We would love to read your opinion. Thank you very much for your company. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartwarming stories.